tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
The over 95 million potentially legal doses of fentanyl that have been seized could have taken the lives of every Canadian at least twice over.
Mounties say they have shut down the largest drug superlab in Canada, and it's in BC. Plus, still closed, Golden Ears Provincial Park remains shut down after damage from that torrential rain 2 weeks ago. And
through competition, consumers have access to better prices, better quality of care, and more choice.
the Competition Bureau wants pet medication easier to get, but some veterinarians have concerns.
I'm more than likely just going to increase my costs for other services.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. It is a drug bust of mammoth proportions. The RCMP says it has taken down the largest, most sophisticated drug superlab in Canada. And it's right here in BC, with links abroad. As Maurice Katz reports, the value of the drugs and ingredients is estimated at almost $500 million.
Almost 100 million doses of fentanyl. That's what Mounties say they've seized after searching a massive drug superlab in Falkland, east of Kamloops, and several locations in Surrey last Friday. Police say they believe the lab is run by a transnational organized crime group involved in the mass production and distribution of fentanyl and methamphetamine in Canada and abroad.
The over 95 million potentially legal doses of fentanyl that have been seized could have taken the lives of every Canadian at least twice over.
The RCMP says it arrested Gaganpreet Randhawa. He's been charged with numerous drug and gun crimes. Mounties say they also seized 89 guns, explosive devices, body armor, and $500,000 in cash. Police say they've also linked the criminal operation to another case where police seized 30 tons of chemicals from a rural property in Enderby. They're also concerned about the discovery of several tons of unregulated chemicals, believed to be used to produce phenyl-2-propanone, a precursor essential to the manufacturing of crystal meth.
Manufacturing methamphetamine using P2P has not been seen in Western Canada until now. And the P2P manufacturing method has been the primary method used by Mexican cartels to produce methamphetamine for years.
Mounties note that cleaning up the superlab will cost more than $500,000. The bust comes just after the RCMP announced charges against 19 people involved in the illicit drug trade in Northeast BC. Maurice Katz, CBC News, Surrey.
Police say one man has been arrested and charged in connection with the shooting into the home of Punjabi musician A.P. Dillon in September. An arrest warrant has been issued for 23-year-old Vikram Sharma. A video posted by media outlets in India at the time show a person firing 14 shots into Dillon's home on Vancouver Island, while a black truck and another smaller vehicle in the driveway were set on fire. Mounties say officers got one person inside the house out. They're asking anyone who may know where Sharma is to contact West Shore RCMP. Pro-Palestinian protesters and legal advocates are demanding an investigation into Vancouver police surveillance and use of force. Demonstrators say the incidents have spanned several months during organized public protests. As John Hernandez explains, they took their concerns to the steps of Vancouver Police Headquarters ahead of a police board meeting.
Moments before the police board convened, pro-Palestinian protesters sent them a message.
We strongly condemn VPD's attempts to criminalize and repress people's expressive rights.
Go forward!
The complaints trace back to May 31st. Pro-Palestinian protesters demonstrated on CN rail lines in East Vancouver. 14 of them were arrested. At the time, police said they refused multiple requests to move and were violent with officers. The protesters say officers used excessive force. Protesters and legal advocates also allege there's been surveillance of demonstrations and individual protesters.
The surveillance activities through drone, through personal cell phones and body-worn cameras potentially violate the policy of the Vancouver Police Department.
Advocates spoke to the board today, outlining those surveillance concerns, calling for an independent investigation led by someone with expertise in human rights and anti-Palestinian racism.
The role of the police at protests should be to maintain the peace and protect the safety of all.
The board agreed to move ahead with an investigation, citing serious privacy concerns. It recommends retired VPD Deputy Chief Bob Rolls lead the investigation, a move that has critics concerned about whether a former high-ranking officer can be impartial.
This is not how to do a proper investigation. You don't hire an ex-cop who is so closely aligned with the very police department that is doing it.
The police board deferred making a decision on use of force allegations. Those who were arrested currently face criminal charges. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
New Westminster's ethics commissioner says the city's mayor broke the rules. That's linked to a trip Mayor Patrick Johnstone took to Dubai at the end of last year for a conference about climate change. Chad Pawson joined us earlier, and we started by asking him what the mayor got wrong with that trip.
So what he did is he accepted an all-expense-paid trip to Dubai to be part of COP28 and learn about local initiatives around climate. He was invited by an international group of mayors that are backed by former New York mayor and billionaire Michael Bloomberg. Now, Patrick Johnson was upfront about going to this conference and how it related to climate work happening in New Westminster. He posted photos on social media while he was there. He wrote on his blog about what he was learning there. But upon returning, 2 opposition councillors in New Westminster complained about this trip, saying that maybe this broke rules. They complained to the ethics commissioner, and she did in fact say that Patrick Johnson, in a judgment, did make some missteps here, that he was fine to go to the conference, but accepting gifts that paid for his luxury accommodation, his business class flights there, and his meals were seen as a personal benefit. Now, what's important to note here, though, is that he didn't do this belligerently. He didn't go to this conference and accept these gifts belligerently, that he made these errors inadvertently and that they were made in good faith.
Okay, so what happens now to Patrick Johnstone?
So the recommendations with the ethics commissioner is that he should do training around these 2 parts of the provincial community charter around how you accept these type of gifts. He's embraced that. He wants to do the training. He also wants his entire council to do the training. There, in fact, was a motion earlier this year that asked for that. Councillors Patrick Johnson are going to be talking about this issue next week, Dan.
Okay. Chad Pawson, thanks very much.
You bet.
Sentencing dates have been set for the 2 men who have pled guilty to the murder of Rapudaman Singh Malik. Tanner Fox and Jose Lopez will appear in person on January 28th and 31st, respectively, at Supreme Court in New Westminster. Fox and Lopez have pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the shooting death of Malik, one of 2 men acquitted in the 1985 Air India bombings. The men's guilty pleas mean they will automatically receive life sentences. The only question now will be how long they have to serve before they can apply for parole. An Indigenous woman in the Okanagan has filed a lawsuit against the federal government and several organizations and people linked to the Catholic Church, claiming alleged physical assault and sexual abuse during her time at Vernon Elementary School in the 1960s. The CBC's Brady Strachan spoke with our Benit Brach earlier in the day. A warning for you, this story does contain distressing details.
Brady, what does she allege happened to her?
Well, Benit, Lori Wilson, she's in her 60s right now. She says when she was a child and she was a member of the Okanagan Indian Band, she attended a regular public school run by the Catholic Church and other institutions. She was there with Indigenous children and other Caucasian children, and she says during her 6 years there at elementary school, she suffered physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. We spoke to her yesterday. Let's hear what she had to say.
I was 6 years old. All of a sudden I was evil, I was dirty. When one of the kids did something, one of the Indian kids did something, and they lined us all up in the office and strapped us all. I was treated like I didn't have a soul. I was treated like I didn't have a brain, and I wasn't taught what I needed to be taught.
To come forward now.
Well, Benit, she says that she's been trying to get justice for this alleged abuse and tried to get a part of a large class action lawsuit, a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that compensated former students of residential schools and day schools. But this church being more of a regular school, this school was not a day school or a residential school, so more of a regular elementary school where Indigenous children attended to. So now she's filing this personal lawsuit, and her lawyers say this is an example of an Indigenous person filing a lawsuit on her own, which is quite rare in the Canadian court system. So, Benit, we got a response from the Catholic Diocese of Kamloops. They say they can't comment on the specifics, but they say they're willing to work with former students to help reverse the harms or take accountability for the harms of their experiences as students. Benit?
All right, well, thank you so much, Brady.
Well, it is Diwali, one of the most important events in the Hindu calendar, and festivities are underway with gatherings, lights, food, and of course, sweet treats. The CBC's Caroline Chan went to a sweet shop.
How long have you been preparing for today?
Yeah, so it's been 1 week we are preparing for this stall. So we were so excited, and still we are so excited to let you show our sweets. We have many sweets.
They sure do. Millions of Hindus are celebrating Diwali across the world to mark the triumph of good over evil. It's also observed by some Sikhs, Jains, and some Buddhists. Darius Madavi joins us now with a look at the weather and the trick-or-treaters. What do they get?
Yes. Well, we earlier tonight we're seeing some of those showers spread across much of Metro Vancouver and really across much of the south coast. But fortunately, they are coming in and out. They were quite light during peak trick-or-treating time, and as we continue to head into the overnight period, we're expecting to see more of the same. I did just miss it there, but there's a special weather statement in place for Highway 3. We'll talk more about that later in the show, Dan, but some snow expected there. But in the meantime, this is just showing the 2 hours of sort of peak trick-or-treating period that we've seen so far, and you can see a decent amount of showers moving over the region, but really coming in and out, nothing too heavy, and so for the most part, those Halloween costumes should be mostly intact.
Sounds good. Thanks, Doris.
Thank you.
The Alberta government is laying out its plans to make big changes to the health and education systems. As Aaron Collins explains, they include restricting access to gender-affirming treatments and changing how students are taught sex ed.
A busy day in Alberta's legislature.
Bill 26.
Bill 27. Bill 29.
Bills tabled that could mean big changes for Alberta's health and education systems. One facilitating the breakup of Alberta's province-wide health board, at the same time making controversial changes to gender-affirming care for youth, restricting access to surgery, hormone treatment, and puberty blockers for minors. Well, the new rules drafted after consulting with some members of the trans community. But that opinion far from universal. Well, the new bills will also impact how gender and sexuality are taught in schools. Parents will now have to opt their kids into sex ed instead of opting out. An unnecessary change, say some who teach youth about sexuality. The new laws would also force schools to inform parents when kids ask to change their pronouns and add limits on transgender athletes competing in sport. The suite of laws upsetting the opposition. The flurry of legislation comes just days before the Premier faces a leadership review. Some political watchers say it's directed squarely at the right flank of the United Conservative Party.
Aaron Collins reporting. If you've ever had a sick pet, you know medication can fetch a hefty price, but Rover may soon be able to get his medication refilled at a local pharmacy. More on the possible change in pet prescriptions and some concerns. That story after the break. The Competition Bureau is recommending pharmacists have more access to pet medication to help bring down the cost of veterinary care for pet parents. As Michelle Morton reports, some vets worry, though, that could affect the well-being of their animal clients and their clinics.
That's a boy. You ready? That's a good lad. There you go.
To provide more affordable pet care to owners, the Competition Bureau says it would like to see animal medication more accessible.
We know that by competing and through competition, consumers have access to better prices, better quality of care, and more choice.
Zine says in the past year, there's been changes to agreements in how manufacturers and distributors operate.
And in those agreements, there were these exclusionary clauses that forced them to only sell to veterinarians. And over the last year, through our work and the work of many, these clauses have been removed.
Now, the Competition Bureau is recommending local governments and colleges mandate the supply of pet medications to more pharmacists, not just veterinarians. Some veterinarians support easier access to pet medication.
If my conversation with you as a client determined that, I don't really need to see you, you just need to pick up this medication, it's an advantage for me as well. It's a time saver.
But he's concerned about making some veterinary drugs more available through pharmacists.
They have no training on the pharmacokinetics of drugs in the species we deal with. They know very little about veterinary drugs. They don't work with them. And some of our medications are quite new and different. They don't have an equivalent in the human pharmacy.
And he says some veterinary practices would need to find other ways of staying afloat with a loss of profits.
I'm more than likely just going to increase my costs for other services. So you as a client may end up in a situation where you're paying me more than you normally would for the services that I'm providing.
CBC has reached out to the College of Pharmacists and Veterinarians of BC, but did not hear back by deadline. Meanwhile, the Bureau says it's planning to meet with different provincial legislators to have conversations around giving more access to pharmacists. Michelle Morton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Ridge Meadows RCMP are warning of an increase in car crashes involving pedestrians or cyclists in the last week. On Wednesday, one person was taken to hospital with serious but non-life-threatening injuries after a truck hit them in Maple Ridge. Police, paramedics, and firefighters were all on the scene. Officials say roads in the area were closed for several hours after that crash. Last Friday, a 49-year-old woman from Pitt Meadows died after a vehicle hit her. Golden Ears Provincial Park remains closed because of damage from that torrential rain that drenched BC's south coast almost 2 weeks ago. It triggered a mudslide and local flooding that killed 3 people. BC's Environment Ministry says the storm that rolled over our region on October 19th damaged trails, roads, and other infrastructure in the park, as you can see. It says the province hopes to be able to reopen a portion of it later this fall, but the exact timeline is not yet clear. Park staff are working with engineers to assess the damage.
Well, the damage is actually lots of debris from the forest, lots of rocks, sand, and basically only half of the road it's damaged. There is a lot of damage on the trails as well, the washout.
BC Parks says visitors are welcome to walk into the park using trails, but you're asked to follow the closure signs. Another port strike could be looming in BC. A longshore and warehouse union has now issued 72-hour strike notice against all BC Maritime Employers Association companies. The Ship and Dock Foreman Local 514 says strike action could start Monday morning at 8 a.m. The employer says the move is disappointing and once again throws Canada's supply chain into uncertainty. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce is asking government to get involved, saying last year's 13-day port shutdown caused BC's exports to fall 23% in July, the lowest since the beginning of the pandemic. There's a little Halloween treat for you. Snow. It fell and settled into the downtown nook of Cranbrook. And here, we got a good dusting on the local mountains that has winter enthusiasts pretty jazzed. Darius is back with your province-wide forecast after this. Time now for a look back through our vast CBC archives. The provincial election has been memorable for the NDP's razor-thin majority and the rise of the Conservatives. It is also historic as voters elected the first majority female legislature. 49 out of 93 MLAs identify as women. But let's rewind back to 1991, when another record was broken when 7 women were appointed to cabinet, the most in the province's history up to that point. Take a look.
It was something very different, this cabinet swearing in. Gospel music, lots of fanfare. It was held at the University of Victoria and not Government House, in order to accommodate hundreds of invited guests. It was the kind of note Mike Harcourt wanted for the swearing in of an NDP government for only the second time in this province's history.
I, Michael Harcourt,
affirm that I will serve Her Majesty.
Affirm that I will serve Her Majesty.
Duly and faithfully.
Duly and faithfully.
True to Mike Harcourt's promise, women play a major role in this new government. There are 7 female cabinet ministers who control 80% of government spending. Nita Hagen from New Westminster has key responsibilities as the Deputy Premier and Minister of Education, Multiculturalism and Human Rights.
We will share very strongly with our male colleagues' decision-making, policy-making roles. And I think that the issue around women's equality is around participation. So I believe that the cabinet and responsibilities that have been put in place today are a very strong demonstration about women participating very fully in government.
Elizabeth Cull from Oak Bay Gordon Head is the Minister of Health and Minister for Seniors. Joan Smallwood, the Minister for Social Services. Other women, Lois Boone from Prince George in an expanded government services post, Darlene Marzari from Vancouver in tourism, and Ann Edwards from the Kootenays in energy, mines and petroleum resources. And newcomer Penny Pretty, who beat Rita Johnson in Surrey Newton election night, is rewarded with a new, powerful women's equality ministry.
For too long, the voices of ordinary men and women have not been heard. Your hopes, your dreams, your priorities, I want to assure you that will be the only agenda of our government.
And the message of conciliation was echoed by Lieutenant Governor David Lamb, who urged the government to live up to its promises.
The people of British Columbia will benefit greatly from and appreciate your promise to provide open and hard-working government.
Andy Orr, CBC News, Victoria.
On that note, on Wednesday, we spoke with longtime BC NDP MLA Jenny Kwan. She spent 19 years as the representative for what was known as Vancouver Mount Pleasant. She's now the MP for Vancouver East. We asked her what she makes of BC's majority female legislature and her time in the chamber.
Well, I think first off, this is a major victory for women. For so long as we can recall, women weren't even allowed to vote. And imagine now in the BC legislature, for the first time ever, there are more women legislators than there are men. So this is a major significant milestone. With that being said, what I hope to see, of course, is that we would normalize that representation in the legislature. For so long, I've always said that legislators need to reflect the faces of our communities across the province. And now women have actually achieved that goal and having more women than men in the legislature.
Take us back, if you would, to 1996 when you were first elected. What stands out to you about those early days?
Well, I'll tell you my first experience when I first walked into the BC legislature and I was looking for the washroom, basic needs. And I walked into one. I swore when I walked in, the door said, and had the women's sign on it. I walked in and the whole wall was lined with urinals. I was so embarrassed. I was horrified. And I thought, oh my God, I hope nobody saw me walk into the men's room. I walked out and I ran away from it as fast as I can. And later on, when I went to check back, and sure enough, it was actually the women's bathroom. And so can you imagine? That's what it was like when I was first elected in 1996. So, you know, they have now, of course, covered up those urinals. But more than that, what's really important, of course, is for women's voices and gender diverse voices to be heard in the legislature. And because we bring different experiences and we bring different points of view to the table, and it shouldn't just be dominated by men.
You were also one of the first Chinese Canadians to sit in the Legislative Assembly, one of the first to be appointed to cabinet. Did you have a sense at the time how significant that was?
Well, I think it was important in terms of the Chinese Canadian community having someone elected for the first time in the BC legislature. In fact, there were two of us, myself and Ida Chong. And so that was a significant moment to mark that milestone, not so much for my own personal accomplishment point of view, but rather for the community and to say how far we have come, especially given the racism, the discrimination that Chinese Canadians had faced in British Columbia. And so, you know, we're seeing the changing phases of legislators and parliamentarians. And I think that is a tribute to British Columbians, a tribute to people in our community. And the time has come to say that representation is absolutely critical, and we must work towards ensuring that the faces of British Columbia reflect people from all walks of life, and everybody's voice is equally valid and equally important.
Lastly, Jenny, we appreciate your time. What would be your message to new MLAs and perhaps those who are thinking of getting into politics, the new female MLAs?
Well, I would say this place belongs to all of us. Your voice matters just as much. And it's just as important. So don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong. We belong. A voice count. That place belongs to all of us. We are the faces of British Columbia. We are the majority of the faces of British Columbia. So we need to own it, and we need to make sure that we don't turn back the clock.
Jenny Kwan, the NDP MP for Vancouver East and longtime former MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
In Atlantic Canada, dozens of federal fisheries officers are back on the job after new protections were put in place for them. They've been refusing to work for the past 2.5 months, fearing for their safety because of violence related to the lobster fishery. But as the CBC's Kayla Hounsell reports, fishers say illegal fishing is still rampant.
This is a busy wharf, and these are the most lucrative lobster fishing grounds in Canada at a time when the commercial fishing season is closed.
I'm a treaty defender, and I don't believe that I need to use any of the federal government's tags to fish. I have an inherent right.
Jolene Marr is a member of the Sebeganegati First Nation. Even when the season is closed, she does have a right to fish for food, social, and ceremonial reasons. But the government says it's illegal to sell, trade, or barter that catch.
I might go trade Buddy down the road for scallops, trade another guy for some wood for the winter. Then do I sell it? Yes, I do.
Leave it. Well, going anywhere. In 2020, there were violent clashes between Indigenous fishers and non-Indigenous commercial fishers. A lobster pound burned to the ground.
There's been no enforcement. What's going on here now in the summer is a full-scale commercial lobster fishery out of season.
Indigenous fishers aren't the only ones fishing outside the season, and fisheries officers did seize more than 100,000 pounds of lobster from this facility earlier this month. They say it's gotten dangerous.
We have had instances of officers being shot at. They have also received intel of gang activity.
Don't fall! This video shows fisheries officers clashing with fishers on the water. 35 officers refused to patrol for 2.5 months, citing safety concerns. They're back now, but only after a labor investigator, in a decision obtained by CBC News, agreed, saying the activity could reasonably be expected to present a serious threat to their life or health. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans says it has taken measures to correct this. The fisheries minister did not respond to a request for an interview.
She's never been in southwestern Nova Scotia.
Have you asked her for a meeting?
Yes.
This captain says there's room in the fishery for everyone, but says it has to happen within the commercial season to protect the stock.
We'll see when the season opens and the non-natives join us, because I'm not going anywheres.
The opening of the season is about a month away. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, Soniaville, Nova Scotia.
As we know, singer-songwriter Taylor Swift is a bit of a big deal. So no surprise, her upcoming stop in Toronto is going to have a huge impact on that city. Thomas Dagla has more on the preparations.
Arriving on trains and planes, up to 500,000 visitors are set to invade Toronto for Canada's biggest concert event in years.
Oh my gosh, it's gonna be crazy. I'm gonna try to avoid Toronto at all costs that day. 'Cause baby, now we got bad blood.
Taylor Swift's Eras Tour, a global spectacle turning the city upside down for 6 shows in November.
One, this is a lot of visitors at 500,000. 2, they're each projected to spend a lot of money.
City officials now laying out how they're preparing for all those incoming Swifties. Transit staff will run extra subway trains and streetcars, while Toronto's also postponing some downtown road work to help ease that notorious traffic.
City Council even voted to temporarily rename this route downtown that many Swifties will take to the concert venue. So the stadium, best known as the home of the Blue Jays, will see its address changed for the month of November to One Taylor Swift Way.
Can you think of anyone else in the world the city would do so much for other than Taylor Swift?
First thing I would say is that we don't book major acts in this city, but we do want to be a city that attracts them.
With Swift forced to cancel shows in Vienna this summer over an ISIS-linked plot to kill thousands, Toronto police say they're watching for trouble.
We are continuously monitoring any potential threats. There are no threats at this time.
The highest grossing music tour of all time, Swift's concerts inject big money everywhere they go, with Toronto expecting a boost of nearly $300 million.
It's good for the city. It brings in tourists, right? And so that's revenue.
A historic visit from the world's biggest star. Call it Toronto, Taylor's version. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
A flurry of activity in the final days of the U.S. presidential election. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump making appearances in crucial battleground states, including Pennsylvania. The latest from the Keystone State, next.
We're sharing really important information with the public, and I feel like this is exactly what our job is, especially as the public broadcaster, especially in morning radio. That's incredibly important.
A version of Darius joins us with his BC-wide forecast.
I couldn't figure out how to stand.
No, but oh my Lord!
Yeah.
How'd you get the arms to do that?
I'm an octopus, Dan.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Of course they do that.
Because your legs
Yes.
count as well.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah,
are
that
they
makes
tentacles or arms?
They are arms. Octopi don't have tentacles.
You're
only
listening,
squid
people?
do. Yeah. These are arms. Squid have 2 tentacles, but they also have arms. So now you know.
And octopi have much better senses of humor, clearly.
Thanks, Dan. I'm glad you love the costume. I don't know why the belly is pink. But let's talk a little bit about the forecast, and then we can talk about all the octopus fun facts you could ever want. If we zoom out here, this is telling us what the conditions are like in Vancouver right now. It's about 9 degrees. We have a few showers popping up across the region, but not expecting to see any major downpours. That's a little bit of good news, but the showers did arrive a little bit earlier than we were maybe hoping for, especially if you're out trick-or-treating. But you can see here across much of the south coast, just the odd shower popping in and out, starting with some of that more consistent rain starting to arrive in Victoria. So hopefully people got out to do their trick-or-treating a little bit earlier. And you can see actually if we run this model forward, that rain was not quite expected to arrive quite this early, but it was always a possibility. So just a little bit unfortunate. We are also going to see some more snow overnight tonight into tomorrow morning on some of the mountains. And as we keep running this forward through the weekend, lots more snow on the way. And if we zoom out to the rest of the province, it's a pretty similar story. Some showers, some flurries popping up in parts of the interior as well. I'm wondering if anybody can take me seriously right now. If you take a look on Haida Gwaii and Vancouver Island, I was really looking forward to doing this, Dan. If you look at Haida Gwaii and Vancouver Island, you'll see some showers popping up in this model run. Sorry?
You're pointing at Tofino as well.
Yes. Tofino, Haida Gwaii, lots of places where we're going to see some showers pop up, some of those flurries at higher elevations, both in the Peace and down in the southern interior as well. It's very helpful to have lots of arms when doing a forecast like this. We have some accumulation totals to show you here. And again, not looking at anything too heavy, nothing too consistent over the next few days. We will have some rainfall tomorrow for, in terms of totals, probably going to see the highest amounts on parts of the west coast of the island or the North Shore here in Vancouver. Maybe 10 to 20 millimeters expected for the city of Vancouver, but up on the North Shore, probably looking at totals closer to 20 to 40 millimeters from today into overnight tonight. If we zoom into our conditions across the province tomorrow don't look too bad, although we do have some shower activity popping up across much of BC. And in terms of a 5-day forecast, and a bit of a rainy, gusty day tomorrow, but nothing too heavy again. And then we have some more showers throughout the weekend, but also some sunshine.
Darius Mahdavi, who always carries his own ink with him, thank you.
Thank you.
To the U.S. election now, where Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are passing each other on the campaign trail again, both making stops in the battleground states of Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. Also up for grabs, Pennsylvania, a swing state with 19 electoral college votes for the taking. The CBC's Richard Madden has more on what's happening there.
Now, election officials here in Pittsburgh say the early voting is going smoothly, the mail-in ballots are being returned securely, and there's no evidence of voter fraud despite the outlandish allegations by the former president. Now, we've all heard Pennsylvania is a must-win state, but here, Pittsburgh and Allegheny County is one of those key counties to watch. This is basically a blue island in a sea of red. It's where near Butler, where former President Trump was shot. So it is understandable why former President Trump is going to hold one of his final rallies here in Pittsburgh on Monday, the eve before Election Day. Now today, on the other end of the state, Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz, made his closing pitch to blue-collar voters there, pushing the economy and protecting women's rights. Take a listen.
I have to say, this feeling of women right now in this, every age and every party, here's what's going to happen on Tuesday. They are going to send a loud and clear message to Donald Trump on November 5th. They're going to send that message whether he likes it or not.
Now, another issue Democrats are pushing is what that comedian said at the Trump rally just last week, where he compared the island of Puerto Rico to garbage. I spoke to one activist here who says this could motivate some undecided Puerto Rican voters. Watch.
It wasn't funny. It wasn't funny at all. And I think it was done strategically because we're at a time where the demonization and dehumanization of people is what is trying to win an election at this point. And we can't continue to allow people to talk about us in the way that they have. It's not going to change. But what
you don't think this is going to move votes away from Republicans?
I don't. I really don't. What I think it will do, however, is motivate Puerto Ricans that were not going to vote, because this was very offensive.
Now, the Harris campaign already running attack ads against Trump for his surrogate's comments at that rally. Speaking of Harris, she will make one of her final closing arguments in Philadelphia the eve before election night. So it shows that this is a key state, and the keys to the White House depends on Pennsylvania. Richard Madden, CBC News, Pittsburgh.
More than 400 alleged victims or witnesses have now come forward with allegations of sexual misconduct by Mohammed Al-Fayed. One of the lawyers representing the group of women says the late owner of Harrods, that luxury department store in London, was behind the worst case of corporate abuse of women in history. More now from Chris Brown.
The scale of sexual abuse Harrods owner Mohammed Al-Fayed is accused of inflicting on his female staff over the decades is staggering. These women are among 400 alleged survivors who've come forward. Jen was just 16 when she says the owner of the iconic London department store molested her. Lindsay was 20.
35 years of, being silenced and not being verified, and also having to dig deep to keep it hidden.
I was deeply ashamed of what happened to me, and I still feel that shame today. And I think being able to speak publicly is part of that healing process.
Fayed, who became globally famous after his son Dodi was killed in the same car crash as Princess Diana, died last year at the age of 94.
He would take my head and he would push it into his genitals.
In a BBC documentary broadcast last month, many of the girls and women who worked for his companies over 3 decades alleged Fayed's staff knew what he was doing and helped him avoid prosecution.
Industrial scale abuse that could have only been perpetrated with a system that enabled the abuse to happen.
In London, lawyers for survivors said the first of what's expected to be a mountain of legal claims has now been filed against Harrods. Among the recent revelations is that Ronnie Gibbons, the captain of the Fulham women's soccer team, also owned by Al-Fayed, was brought by car to his department store when she was 20 years old and sexually assaulted.
By speaking out, we're making it harder for this kind of behaviour to be tolerated anywhere.
Harrods has started its own compensation process for victims, but lawyers say many women don't feel comfortable dealing directly with the store, as senior staffers from the Al-Fayed era still work there. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
The scope of the devastation in Spain is becoming more clear as rescue crews comb through streets ravaged by deadly floods. At least 158 people have died. Yasmin Khanea shows us the scenes of despair as some cry out for missing loved ones.
A harrowing rescue as firefighters hoist up a baby from floodwaters, following Europe's deadliest floods in years. With roads turned into rivers, rescuers help people and pets escape homes, while others use dogs to search for the missing. A desperate ordeal for some, like this woman shouting out the name of a missing loved one. Local authorities have not disclosed how many people are still unaccounted for. They believe some victims are trapped inside vehicles yet to be reached. Meanwhile, people in the hardest hit areas salvage what they can from the ruined homes. Father and husband Amadeo Ibanez says he feels powerless. The river rose for half an hour, he says. We have lost almost everything, or everything. Residents on the outskirts of Valencia say their community is unrecognizable. Pharmacy student Natalia Perez says the view here was once great. This bridge was really nice, she says. It was an ancient bridge with ruins, and now there's nothing left. Nothing. Meteorologists say in parts of the country, a year's worth of rain fell in just hours.
This was a well-forecasted event by the Spanish Meteorological Services. What happened on a decision-making level is another story.
Regional officials are being criticized for waiting too long to warn people of the dangers.
People's lives could and should have been saved.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez visiting an emergency command center Thursday, urging people to stay home, warning the dangers are far from over. Yasmin Ranea, CBC News, Vancouver.
Coming up, Smashing Pumpkins are more than just a rock band. They're also a Halloween trick in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, where they celebrated the spooky season with a drop? More on that next. Halloween brought together a group of people in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia this morning for a smashing good time. Woo! Star of the great Pumpkin Drop was a massive gourd that tipped the scales at more than 600 kilograms. That's a 1,300-pound pumpkin. Raised up in a dumpster with 60 meters in the air, then crashing to the ground with a miner's splat.
It wasn't just the spectacle people came for. This event was both a trick and a treat. The big pumpkin was filled with ping pong balls for a local radio contest, and the person whose balls got closest to a target on the ground walked away with $10,000 in gold bars.
That's great for them.
I'd rather have the gold octopus.
Or the bat.
We asked people for pictures of their Halloween skeleton decorations ahead of the big night. Might I add, they're humorous. What a bone-warming wedding scene. Will you marry me? Nothing to see here, just 4 friends on a very normal camping trip.
It's the skeleton version of Ray Gunn, the Australian breakdancer. That's about to come up. Oh yeah, there's the camping trip. In a VW van with the hood up. That's good. There, okay, there's the...
Ray Gunn,
there's
Australian
Ray Gunn. I think we have another one. Let's wait for it. Oh, there you go.
There.
Simone Biles, or should we say...
Simone Biles.
Simone Biles. Apparently it's time to say goodbye. It's probably a good idea.
Well, thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6.
And we'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, somehow, right after the National. Good night, happy Halloween, happy Diwali.